So far, we haven't been able to get Darren to smile this morning.
Darren smiles all
Hey,
the
good
time.
morning, Darren.
Darren,
Good morning.
Darren smiles all the time.
He sure does. He's a happy guy.
Just have to catch him. Okay, let's get going here. Our first topic is defenses against and use of weapons. And I guess the first question is, how much or how often does your art train against weapons? Generically, weapons, not any particular weapon.
So is this against weapons?
Against weapons, not with weapons, but against
Okay.
like knife, gun, rope, club. What are the more common? What do you want?
Paperclip. Paperclip. Paperclip.
Paperclip. Okay. What are other common weapons?
Pencil.
Sensei, I can jump in here with one observation.
Yeah.
we got randori charts that we spread out on a table, and the students go by and look at the randori chart to determine what they want to do next. And a significant percentage, probably 20% of the 100+ techniques on that randori chart are weapons. So we have a Glock, we've got a Beretta, we've got different sized blades, and they can grab those and attack one of two people on the mat with a random attack using those weapons. So every time we do randori is the answer to your question, and we do randori most classes. So
Okay. Any other?
I'd like to throw some input on that question. So, normal, I'm basically directly under George Kirby, so we're kind of following the same ways that we teach the defense against weapons. Normally, like if you watch his videos, a lot of his defenses against weapons, it tends to be more at the higher belt levels, especially against gun disarms. That's more of a black belt type of self-defense. Knives and clubs just start showing up at the lower belt levels. Now, my opinion, especially with how dangerous our world is becoming, I think we need to start training against weapons, especially the more common weapons. It's typically knife and stick at the very least. Start training those against those at a lot earlier, at least. I want to say around late green belt level, just as an introduction. This way we have something going, and to get the mental process going. Okay, this is just how dangerous a weapon can be, and just getting some self-defense against those weapons would be a good start.
Same for us. A little bit of what Eric's saying, a little bit of what Dave's saying. For us, we train with weapons regularly. There's not a class where I don't think that we don't do something with a weapon at some point, whether it be the beginning instruction or especially during randori. We always have the opportunity to be able to use a weapon, to be able to continue our practice and being able to be more efficient at defending weapon attacks. Even when there's and this is where it kind of goes into what Eric was just saying, even when it goes into a beginner level, and a lot of times, more often than not, the beginners will be like, I don't know what to do with that. And so the response for that is, and neither will you know what to do with that when it's happening to you in real life. And so that's a good segue for us to be able to begin instruction on how, what, you can do if something like this was to happen to you. This is how you become better at it to be able to perform an effective technique or do something that's effective to be able to get yourself into a safer situation. So we train with weapons on a regular basis, both at a high level and beginner, entry level practitioners. But yeah, it's pretty often that we use weapons.
We,
When I started with you, I was finishing up a karate black belt, and from the early ranks on up, we practiced gun takeaways and gun defenses and blade takeaways and blade defenses, and we learned more and more variations as we proceeded up the belts. So when I was starting with Budoshin Jujitsu, I'd already been exposed to a lot of weapons from my previous black belt.
Okay. I know with the Budoshin system going to green belt, there really are no weapons defenses. I know I was originally taught Teinagi Seki. I originally learned it for a knife attack. And when I set up the curriculum, I realized, well, it'd be safer to teach the movements of the hand throw from a lapel grab or choke, and then they'd be able to transfer that to a knife attack defense more easily. I probably don't teach it on a regular weapons on a regular or weekly basis, or didn't. And I usually looked at, well, if it's on the belt exam, okay, we'll do it. I know there are some techniques where it can be modified that I really limit to brown black belts, where even though the person comes at you with a knife, they end up cutting themselves. And I like to say it's accidental, but that's how the technique works. And in essence, his prints are on the weapon, not yours. That makes a difference. But I think when we're teaching weapon defenses, it's really important that students understand the threat it poses to them. Mike Langwich has what's called an electric knife, which you purchase for, I don't know, a couple $100 or something like that, and you can vary the intensity of the electric charge on the knife. So if it touches your opponent, at some point it's going to feel like a knife cut because of the electric charge you get from the weapon, which is a nice tool, but you can't have it in a randori situation, because if someone disarms you and throws the knife across the room, you're looking at $200-300 down the tubes. And I know there are other sensei that will put markers or chalk on their knife, rubber or wooden knife edges. So if you do get cut, it shows up. Sometimes that can be okay. Sometimes they'll use colored markers. And then sometimes they realize, well, I probably shouldn't have used marks a lot because that's permanent. And it really messes up a person's gi. And it won't come out in the laundry. So as an instructor, we kind of have to be careful at times as to what we're using to teach students with. I don't use rubber knives. I'll use a wooden knife. And I blunt the end of it down, because I had one student who got a serious hand injury trying to block the knife with the palm of his hand, and that was a learning experience for him. But problem with wooden knives is that if they get thrown across the room accidentally, or the person loses, they can hit someone and injure them. Rubber knives, the blades break rather quickly, at least in my dojo. A rubber knife is maybe good for 10 or 15 minutes in their history, and they cost as much as the wooden knives do. So I just say go wooden and hold on to the weapon.
That's interesting to hear, Sensei. Our rubber knives are a hard rubber, and been using them for years and never had any breakage.
Yeah, there are two kinds of rubber knife. I know there's the ones I get are somewhat flexible, but they're not made in this country, and they don't have the knife guard on them. They're more they're easier to conceal because of that. But when they break at the hilt.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part. And so that's why I just use wooden knives. I know rubber knives are basically safer.
Sensei, also in Randori, we use baseball bat, hanbo, various sticks, also asp. And those are really valuable from the standpoint of learning where to position yourself in an assault with a large wooden object coming at you rather rapidly.
Asps are not nice. They are not nice defensive tools.
There's a lot of legal issues when it comes to
I'm not talking about using an asp. Yeah, not talking about using it defensively. I'm talking about defenses against one.
Oh yeah, well yeah, it's still. If the person gets a good swipe in there.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Now I have trained in a martial art called Kali, a Filipino martial art, and we start with at least 1 or 2 wooden sticks. So the entire curriculum is we start off with sticks. So we're learning how to strike with and against sticks simultaneously, and eventually leading to all the defense, the blocks, the disarms, and so on, that'll lead to knife and knife defense, and then it would also lead to empty hand training, but it's all the same movement. So yeah, it's when we train in knives, we have the aluminum trainers. So these are it does hurt, especially when it starts hitting like the bone part. That really hurts. Or like if I block it a certain way and it hits this part, the aluminum trainers they let you know it's there. But it's just an aluminum trainer like I want to say 8 inches long and kind of a thick material. This way you have some weight in your hand, but it's not. It's very blunted, and it's not going to cause any damage other than blunt damage. But I do think we should start training more often with against weapons. I also do agree that we should, especially at the very early stages of students training, they need to know how to at least move their own body, and that can take some time. So white to green is around that stage where they need to learn how to at least get the basic movements down before you start adding in an extra dangerous element.
Eric, I agree with you completely. Tai Sabaki is a big part of weapons defense.
Right.
When I'm doing my mile run part of my workout, I sprint the last 100 yards or so, and I can add speed to that sprint just by reflecting on the brass knuckle double-bladed butterfly knives. You know what I'm talking about? You got brass knuckles here, and you got a blade coming out of the back of your hand and a blade coming out the front of your hand. And you got a couple of those. I don't know what kind of defense could be rather consistent against that type of a weapon. So if I
Now,
want
now you're
to,
getting fancy.
I just in my imagination put somebody behind me wearing a set of of brass knuckle butterfly knives, and I can run a lot faster. It's still not fast, mind you, but it's faster.
You only need to be faster than the slowest guy, Dave. That's all.
Right.
That's a comforting thought, but
Get back on top here. How many of you teach weapons as an offensive tool? Now, I know with the side, I know you can teach almost anything as an offensive weapon. Or how many of you actually teach the offensive use of traditional weapons in the dojo?
Sensei, before you jump into that, I just have a couple of comments on other topics that we just talked about.
Sure.
I've never had an issue with any of the rubber knives, as well as the same as David mentioned. The rubber knives that I have been there for years, but never compromised or one has ever been damaged. I also use the shock knife as well, and the shock knife that we use is pretty intense. It'll go through the gi a little bit. When you've been touched with it, and so that's an effective tool for us. In addition to the knife itself has strobe lights on it that you can opt to use or not to impact somebody's visibility or to be able to see what's coming at them. So at higher levels, that's also applied in the effort of continuing their ability to be able to use it to defend themselves. So it's a little distracting, if not blinding at sometimes. So you still have to be able to get it. But I think the most important thing is when you're teaching any defense against any weapon, and especially edged weapons, it's extremely important that the people that you're working with understand what the threat is. And understanding what the threat is not only how to defend it, but what is going to happen with it. If you find yourself in a position to where you have to defend an edged weapon, knife or otherwise, then you should be prepared to be cut, period. End of story. Like everything that we do is designed for us to be able to be better at being able to be successful in defending ourselves. But the reality is you're likely going to be cut in that whole encounter. And so what the part about behind that is, does the individual that you're teaching how to defend themselves against an edged weapon understand what happens when the human body is cut by an edged weapon? It's not like, okay, I've been cut and I can just go over to whatever. Like there's a lot of video that if you have never seen a cut, a gash, a stab, a slice by an edged weapon, that will open the eyes of an individual to like, okay, it's not just in a movie. This is not something like I'm going to continue to defend myself. These things will fillet you wide open, and these things will go to the bone. Now you have a lot of other things to consider about, I decided to defend myself now. I just was cut, and this is not what I expected. Can I continue now? Right? And now your life is on the line. And so I think that those parts are often missed in a lot of different dojos that I've seen and witnessed in a lot of places. The importance of understanding what happens, first, that you're going to be cut, and then two, what happens as a result of a cut, is extremely important in somebody's ability in being able to defend themselves. And then yes, we do teach how to use a weapon as well, offensively.
That's why you really, anytime you're defending or teaching a defense against a weapon, you really have to get into what happens if, and the students need to realize that, because some people will say, well, it's a little knife. I'm going to defend with, $50 or $200 I have in my wallet. And that's what they do. And the reality is you don't know how proficient this person is with a little pen knife. You don't know what he can do to you, and it's probably easier to just give him the $200 and be able to walk away from it. Sometimes you have that choice, sometimes you don't.
We always start with the first thing, exactly what Dave said.
Yeah.
Think about what's coming behind you with the guy with the two-edged blade with brass knuckles on it. The best thing to do is to turn around and run. That's what we always start with.
Yeah.
Amen.
Right. If you get away from the person, that's the best thing to do. And then that's some people will say, well, that's being a coward. The response is, I'd much rather be a live coward than a dead idiot.
Yeah.
And it's a hard thing to get across to some people, but that's a conversation that we have to have with our students, because those are the realities. It's nice to be able to teach defenses against a knife, club, rope, gun, what have you, but the reality is you also need to cover what can happen. Like even if a person has a automatic handgun and you can grab onto it and the weapon fires, you're still going to end up with second or third degree burns on the palm of your hand as that cartridge comes out. What do you call it? Figure out the term.
Chamber.
The chamber. If you're grabbing onto a revolver, your little finger, and you're trying to block it from firing, and you grab the cylinder, you also need to make sure that your little finger doesn't get hit by the firing pin, because that hurts and it's bloody. I've had that happen once, and it was a real learning experience. I mean, what you have to do is you have to finish the technique. You can't say, my finger's bleeding, let's stop. That doesn't work on the street. And you have to be very realistic with your students as to, regardless of what they do, there are consequences. There's one gun technique we have where you end up decloaking the finger, the trigger finger. Literally, not only does it break the finger at the base, but it also decloaks it, which means it takes the skin off. And the solution for that is you can now only count to 9. If you can follow through with what I've said, because they usually will end up removing the finger. So, you do have to, and some people won't do certain techniques because they're afraid they're going to injure their attacker. And so you run into all sorts of, what do you call it, morality questions. And I think we run into these issues, even for the lowly hand throw, Teinagi, which we all teach nicely as a submission. You take the person down, you press their hand down, and they tap out. Whereas in reality, and I've had a couple of students use it on the street because that's what they had to do, it breaks the person's wrist. They've been upset that they broke the person's wrist. So, it's something we, as jujitsuka, we need to, our students need to be aware that everything they learn ultimately is designed to injure, to prevent the person from attacking you. But you also have to realize that had the person not attacked you, this wouldn't have happened to them, and hopefully nothing to you. So I guess, there's I think the one issue we're missing is, haven't hit on here so far, is use of force. Is
This
it?
is Jason.
Pardon?
Sorry, go ahead. This is Jason. I just want to chime in quick, if you don't mind. I apologize.
Yeah,
If you don't, can you hear me well? I know Sir was having problems. So there's no substitute for practicing in realistic, impossible situations. That's just going to be key. The mindset, a lot of the psychological mindset of a person who is applying versus the conscious thought behind anything that we do. It's critical to survival. And I come from a military background. So for me, It might be a little different from you guys, but apply true to life rhythm movements without conscious thought is critical to my survival and for what I do in my job. And unfortunately, the outcome of that engagement or that when we're in a situation, it's to, counter, neutralize, and disable that attacker or that assailant or that person. So, but there's no in what I do. In our training preparation is key. And I like what everybody said here. I mean, there's rules of engagement and there's rules of, there's escalation of force in law enforcement. Everybody probably knows that if they're law enforcement officers. But the key isn't to inherently kill somebody right off the bat. It's not that. It's the fact is, depending on your situation, you never want to be inherently involved in weapon-based type of attacks, right? We all know this. We try to avoid them. But the reality is, if it comes down to it, it's either you or them. And unfortunately, and when I train my students, a lot of it comes with mindset. I have showed pictures of things like officers being stabbed and slit open. And, when you look at your students and they're trying to absorb this, I don't think people really understand the magnitude of what happens if you're actually you're on the other side of the scene and that knife or the gun or any weapon, even a broomstick. I don't think people really have that mindset. They understand they want to defend. They learn these defensive moves, but I see a lot of students, they forget these movements as much as practice. And a lot of teachers that I've seen out there, they teach it a couple times. And I don't want to be negative of other schools, but they do teach off and on. But they don't teach the students the ramifications of what happens when you apply those movements. And I don't want to say anything bad, but there is a definitely distinct difference between understanding and realizing, the use of realistic application out there. I don't know if you agree or not, but I come from a different background. So for me, everything I have to do is I have to keep it simple, it has to be effective, and it has to be immobilizing right there, right now. And that goes for any kind of weapons. But, you have to have that. There's a mindset to the person. And there's a mindset that is, it's not to say that it solves all the problems. But inherently, any kind of weapon attack, including firearms, I definitely will say what you guys are saying. There's no substitute for practicing in a realistic environment. I don't know if that makes sense to many of you, but I just want to throw that out there when you're talking about, the weapon-based training.
Right.
Was it Jason? I completely hear what you're saying, and that doesn't matter for anyone. There's different levels of what people
100%.
take martial arts for, self-defense or whatever you want to call it, right? And so you have the everyday citizen, you have law enforcement officials, you have tactical for military or whatever level it is. In every one of those, there's a mindset that has to happen. There has to have an understanding. That doesn't happen to individuals immediately. A lot of individuals take a long time to get there, if they can ever get there. But the reality is self-preservation. That's what you're coming to learn self-defense for. And so ultimately you have to be able to have that, what you're kind of referring to with a different terminology would be like a switch, right? You have to be able to immediately not only react and respond effectively, but you cannot be thinking about what's going to happen to the other person. Now, there's a lot of things that go on with traditional martial arts in that aspect. The traditional martial artist wants to say, okay, I don't want to injure someone else either, right? But the tactical martial artist wants to say that I'm going to self-preserve myself because this is a life or death situation no matter what. It's not like a street encounter, right? Like you have a threat that may or may not be life-changing, life-threatening. You don't know how to analyze those things that quick. But in your advancement in martial arts, you typically learn how to develop your mental capacity to understand those threats and how to apply what needs to be necessary in an effort to be self-preserved. So yeah, I get what you're saying. And yes, that is 100% extremely important for every martial artist at every level for whatever they're applying it for.
100% agree with you.
I I agree with what both of you are saying. That is one of the things, and I've had students that have been in street situations, and they come back usually amazed at what the technique has done, regardless of what I've told them ahead of time. I think part of their success is because, as Dave has said, is we put students in, and I don't know if you're familiar with the term, into randori situations, which means they are attacked continuously, at least in my dojo, for it could be 1 minute, or it could be 1 minute with one attacker, then a second attacker comes in after half a minute, so they're dealing with two attackers. The defender has no idea what weapons, if any, the attacker is going to use. The attacker, the defender is not told what weapons to use. It's, whatever they can grab hold of or have concealed in their clothing. And the defender has to react. And that skill, as in your profession, is what's critical. Is the time, because you do not have time to think in a street situation. Once it gets physical, you simply have to react. And then the morality of whatever you did, you can discuss till hell freezes over later. But your concern is protecting your life and being able to walk away from it. And that's a hard, students eventually, I don't even think they realize the skill that some of the upper belts don't realize the skill they have, because they never get into, or they've never been in a street situation where they've had to use it. Very few martial artists ever get to use what they've learned. I'm not saying they should go out and find someone to attack them, but that's that. If you can develop that skill and keep it honed, it's there. We like to call it mushin, or no mind, and that's a hard
Scissors.
It's a hard skill to. That takes time to develop, because the student has to be competent in their other skills in order to respond immediately, because you don't have time to think.
Sante, that's exactly what I was thinking I would say I was thinking that, but I was probably learning that from you from a long time ago. So, I mean, the understanding of the states of mind is critical. And that's why we continue to do things so many times, to be repetition and over and over and over and over and over, to be able to learn it to be second nature, so you can respond effectively and without thought. And that's why you have the states of mind, whether it be Mushin, Zanshin, or Budoshin, or whatever state of mind that you think that it is, or whatever's necessary to be able to react and respond effectively. So yeah, at a higher level, but that takes a very long time for somebody to get there. That's very experienced martial artists that get to those levels to be able to understand the differences.
What decades ago, when I was doing a seminar for actually the state of Nevada law enforcement, and all these agencies had sent usually their biggest arrest control, or because instructor was usually the biggest guy on the force back then, and so I don't want to say derogatory, but I had a lot of cousin bubbas. And there were two things that happened. One was a learning experience for me, and the other was for them. The first day I had 2 injuries. The students had 2 injuries from techniques I was teaching. And at that point, they realized they needed to, if they were practicing with each other, they needed to slow down a bit, because they just went gung-ho with the arrest and control techniques. The other issue was that, and this is a weird story and in law enforcement, you have certain terminology. There's an a learning institution in California known as UCSQ, University of California at San Quentin. And one of the things people do in jail is they learn new skills. And they found out that one of the things that was coming out of UCSQ was that the guests there were learning that if this is before officers really had semi-automatic handguns, that if an officer fired a revolver and they squatted down and then did what was called a grasshopper roll from 20 feet away, they could get to the officer before he fired the second shot. And what came out of that was they stopped with their firearms, they stopped aiming for the person's upper body and they went for the lower torso. Because the person has to squat down before they can go into this roll. But how you say there's an evolution of skills that goes on both sides, and that's the problem. And we, it's hard for us as martial artists to keep up with that because unless we're actually involved in law enforcement of one type or another, we don't come across those situations. And so in any event, I think the issue of hindsight is wonderful. But I think it's essential that we have our students trained so they can, many times they have to respond without thinking. Because that thinking, if you have to take time to think, especially in law enforcement or military, if you have to take time to think what you're going to do in a physical attack at the time of the attack, you've lost. You don't have that time. And so the question for us as martial artists, although that really wasn't a topic here, is how do we get students to accept that mindset and develop that skill? I know there are some systems of ju-jitsu where they can do, said this before, they can do beautiful katas. They can have prearranged routines that are absolutely beautiful to watch, but put them in a randori situation, they can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. And that's, that's an issue we have to deal with. So are there any further thoughts on this or?
Yeah, I agree with that, Sensei. I mean, look, whether you practice randori or not, or if you even just, if maybe you're just auditing the cross certification for Budoshin, that's one of the requirements. You have to be able to defend yourself against X amount of attackers in a randori scenario, controlling the mat surface, understanding the threat, and being effective in performing your technique when it's unscripted. So that's extremely important. Try that. You could put a lot of people into a position to where they think that they're good enough to be able to, or they're proficient enough to be able to defend themselves until they're in one of those scenarios, even though it's a drill. It's pretty challenging.
Yeah. I've seen some scenarios where you walk, where the dojo, the training area is set up with it like a hallway, and you're walking down a hallway. So what happens if someone comes out of a door and attacks you from behind? Or you're walking down a narrow walkway and you're confronted by 2 or 3 potential attackers. What do you do? And most of us don't have the resources to set up situations like that. And that's a limitation on us, unfortunately. But I think a large part of effective self-defense training is the psychological aspect of training. training your mind to do its thing without you having to think about it. And it's, you know, once a student gets a concept, it's like if you want to walk into your house and there's a door there, what do you do? Do you think about all the steps you have to go through to open the door and go through it? Or do you just open the door and go through it? And once they understand that this is what Mushin is, where you do things without thinking, then sometimes it's easier for them to apply the concept to the martial arts. Because they realize they have this ability. They just need to give the mind some more training. So, do we want to do anything else with defenses against the use of weapons today? Okay. Darren and I last time, after the official conference was over, we got into a brief discussion on kinesiology and as dealing with the martial arts and I kind of took some of the things he said and I said and made it into a topic outline, and I moved it up to topic number 2 because I wanted to hit Darren up again before we both forgot about the discussion we had. So I don't know, and this is not a discussion necessarily of specific techniques, but using, and Darren will correct me, using body position, your attacker's body position or movement as a key to using their movements to get into effective techniques to counter whatever they're trying to do. Am I making sense, Darren?
Yes, but I think that was a preface to what was the topic, and so I'll help try to clarify a little bit. There was a video that was released by different entities. It was 2 different styles of martial arts, and then it was one entity that likes to expose martial arts for being theatrical or ineffective, if you will, right? And so, in my opinion of the video that was there, it was by neither side, it was understood what the specific style of martial art that each one of the people knew or were defending that was the most effective. Did they understand how it is used or how it's applied to be effective in different scenarios? And so what they did was they took an Aikido guy who, in my opinion, did not understand his own art. And then they took a BJJ guy who, in my opinion, didn't understand Aikido either. And then they put them like it wasn't a cage, it was a mat, just like a dojo or a gym scenario. And they said, okay, fight. Let's see whose art is better. Let's see who's going to be the most effective. Let's see what style, what system is going to be the most effective in the outcome of a fight. And to me, I felt like that was totally out of context. And that meant that nobody involved understood how each one of those arts or systems are effective. And so when you have an Aikido person who is going to be the most non-confrontational individual ever, but has technique that can be used to be effective when they need to defend themselves, but not when you're putting them face to face, not in a combat scenario. That's not how Aikido is designed to be able to use as effective self-defense. It's when something happens that the individual or the person who's attacking or the threat is there, does something, not aware that person has that skill set that can apply these things in Aiki technique or form or whatever to be able to to be able to defend themselves effectively. It's if they're caught off guard, they don't know that. It's not like, okay, I'm gonna be in a boxing ring, or I'm gonna be in a jiu-jitsu match, or I'm gonna be in a MMA match. That's not how Aikido is designed to be used as an effective self-defense system or style. And so you have this aggressive BJJ guy who's used to hands-on combat, probably, and you have this Aikido guy who is not and thinks that he knows what the reality is and defending himself, and he just kind of gets slapped around a little bit and then crumbles to the ground. And so I felt like that. I don't know what level the guy in Aikido was. I don't know what level the guy in BJJ was. But the guy in BJJ didn't even use any ju-jitsu, regardless of what you want to call it. And the Aikido guy didn't do anything. They both kind of just stood up in like if they were going to fight, boxing style or fisticuffs or whatever you want to call it. And so he just got slapped around a little bit until he had enough. And I thought that was the most uneducated form of display of what these two styles were and how you determine which style is the most effective or the best style.
No two black belts are created equal. So you've got a variable in there that's really significant as far as determining which style is more effective. You got to measure the skill set of these black belts before you pit them against each other. So you've got apples against apples and oranges against oranges. And that's the first thing that strikes me about how ridiculous the scenario is that you witnessed or you observed, Darren.
Yeah,
I was able to find that video on YouTube as well.
I could love.
Neither of the two people, the Aikido guy or the BJJ guy, were able to demonstrate any aspect of their particular art.
Wow.
It's just like one guy was cornered on a wall, the other guy was doing your slap your hand, slap your face type routine. I may be belittling it somewhat, but it really was it didn't prove anything other than this is not a realistic situation. A few years ago, I was training in a gym, and I went up to the second floor, and there were these two MMA guys practicing and BJJ, and they were both, attacking each other low. And one guy didn't know what to do. So I just walked over. I didn't introduce myself or anything. I walked over. I said, when he bends over, grabs your legs, just grab the back of his pants and let him pull your feet out from under you. And then I walked away. And that's what he did. And he ended up doing basically a Tomonagi stomach throw, for lack of a better phrase. And they both got up and looked at me. And I guess because that's one of the niceties of jiu-jitsu. You grab what you can, but I don't know how to say that they didn't have what I considered were basic skills or basic, if you see an elbow sticking out, this is the way I interpret part of Darren's concern. If you see an elbow sticking out like this, and you're trying to do some other technique with the wrist or shoulder, what do you do with the elbow? You can either bring it down or you can take it up into another hold. And that's why the understanding of how the human body moves is so important. Because once you understand how the human body moves, then you may find yourself where I'm trying to do this wrist lock takedown, for example, and the guy sidesteps into me and raises his elbow up. What do I do now? Because that's the way the street's going to work. It very rarely, unless you're absolutely lucky, it's very rarely that a technique works as cleanly as it does in the dojo. And what do you do when things go south? And you don't want to if you can avoid it, you don't want to completely disengage, because then you have to start all over. And the other guy's not going to be as nice next time, for lack of a better phrase.
So that's understanding the human anatomy and how it
Right.
works, and what,
Right.
you know, what it's
Right.
applied, and then how to transition from one thing to the next when you have to.
Mhm.
Right, right. You know, if you know your basic moves and you know how the human body moves, if things go south, you still have a chance of reestablishing control. Seki was big on that. I mean, if we were wrestling around on the mat, he'd refer to it as chicken scratching and chew us out and tell us what we, you know, and then he'd give one-on-one coaching on, okay, you're on the ground, here's what's happening. And he'd say, reach under his chin and turn it. And it's just that your mind has to be in tune with the other person's body.
Yeah, it's extremely important, Sensei, that the Tori, the person who's applying a technique understands what's happening with the body, because what do? Like if for example, I'll use the example that you gave, that you have somebody in a wrist lock and you break their wrist. Do you keep applying a wrist lock that's no longer effective? You already broke the wrist.
Yeah.
Now you have to move on. You have to do something else to be able to. That's why, I mean, you've heard me, Dave's heard me plenty of times. I think Eric has heard me as well talk about throttling a technique, right? To be able to maintain compliance when you're applying some sort of discomfort, or applying a technique to a limit to where the person that you're applying it to understands that there's a threat. I need to be able to comply, or something else is going to happen that I'm not going to be comfortable with, right? It's going to be damaging. And so if you exceed that limit and you damage it, it's broken, you no longer have, you don't have compliance anymore.
No, you don't.
You've already broken that part of the body. Now you have to be able to move on, or your threat is still standing right in front of you. And that's applied to every single thing that we do. So even in you know, regardless of what the situation is, if you break something, you have a lot of factors that are coming in, and adrenaline being one of them, that would not register with somebody, the threat, that if you did damage them, that they're going to say, okay, I need to stop now. You have to continue to move on and put yourself into a secure situation to preserve yourself. I mean, that goes back to the first topic that we talked about today.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think part of it is just working. If you are in a sensei, you have a responsibility. I mean, even though it may not be, this is what I plan to teach tonight. If something happens and a student ends up in a unique situation, their elbow is up, or they're standing the wrong way, you know, you need to be able to intervene and bring the whole class to this and say, okay, if this happens, this is one thing you can do. And sometimes, I know with jujitsu at least, it isn't always, there's only one thing you can do. You usually have options depending upon the other person's skill level or build, or all these other factors that come into play. But you also usually have a number of different things you can do, and you just need to have the training to be able to shift gears real fast sometimes. Also being aware that if you actually injure a person to where something is broken, etc., at that point, I will tell my students, get away from this person as fast as you can. Because, as Darren said, the adrenaline level goes up. All they may want to do is get away from you, and they now see you as a threat to their life. And so they're going to do whatever they can to injure you to protect themselves. They are now in what was your shoes. And that's why Darren has also said it's so important to be able to control what you're doing so that you can use the pain to get compliance. Now, with respect to Jason, I'll go back to, again, years ago, I was at a seminar, and I was officially teaching knife defenses. And I ended up with a group of 8 Army personnel who were there with their CO and or sergeant, and they thought I was going to be teaching how to use a knife to kill your opponent. So I had to shift gears, and fortunately I had enough of an understanding of human anatomy to say, okay, this is how you can do it. But I also went back to, okay, this is if you are, I also went back to, because Seki taught a number of techniques of what happens if you are attacked with a knife, and you can turn that knife around and use it to inflict serious or mortal injury to your attacker. And so the session was successful, but it sure was a learning experience for me, because I had to adjust my mind to a different mindset. And that is hard for some people to do.
That's true.
Pardon?
You're 100% correct. That even applies to myself and anybody else when I'm teaching regular students compared to when I'm teaching somebody on the base.
Yeah.
And like I was saying earlier, the mindset or what you apply, emotionally, the unfettered mind, you gotta take and like Sir was saying earlier, it's at the level of the experience. But you're correct. I mean, it takes a different mindset to apply a different type of technique. And in these days, more or less, I mean, I'm assuming you probably did this class 20 years ago, maybe longer. Things have changed a lot even in my lifetime, where we were doing line 6 to now McMath and the Marine Corps martial arts program to now what we train. So much has changed in the way we thought, how we apply things, and how hand-to-hand combat was thought of 40 years ago compared to what we do today.
Right.
So, and the mindset has also changed along with that. A long time ago was to mobilize and kill and shoot, and now today it's a whole different mindset in theory, and how we do things and how we apply things, and the laws that are associated and things that can get you in trouble. Now they're more interested in regulatory compliance. We do a lot of pain control compliance now. Offensive, weaponless defense, retention tactics, is seen differently than it was, I'd say, 20 years ago, beginning of my career. So we've come a long ways. But I definitely agree 100% what you said, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Right. I mean, I said some time ago, I've been in court once in a use of force situation, and I had to explain to the judge, in my own words, what reasonable force was. Okay, and I had to explain how I used reasonable force and why it was necessary to use that much force. And at the time you're in that situation, you don't have time to think about all these quote unquote morality issues. But after the fact, you do have to give it some thought, because you may be held accountable for what you did, and you have to be able to have a reasonable and logical explanation of why you did what you did. Or I won't say why, I'll say the reasons you did what you did. Never ask a person why they did something. Always ask, what are your reasons? The attacker was found guilty. His attorney was exceedingly frustrated because he didn't think I'd be able to come up with a good response. The other side of the coin is that the philosophy of the Seki, and I'm saying this mainly for Jason's knowledge, Seki's philosophy always was, you never fight people. You always help them go where they want to go. And
Well said.
And because at the end of the day, you have to be able to live with yourself. And if you help a person go where they wanted to go, I mean, this is a warped mindset. I will admit it to some extent. If you help people go where they want to go, You haven't fought their intentions. You haven't fought what they wanted to do. You haven't challenged them. You helped them. Now, admittedly, that's a kind of a warped mindset, but I think for martial artists and maybe even military or law enforcement, that's an attitude you have to have, because otherwise you're going to have a lot of conflicts going on between your ears and your heart and your hara. And that's hard. That's what makes life hard to live with. You know, you have to have a way of rationally accepting the reasons you did what you did. And that's why, as I said before, if you have a student who's in a street situation, they come to you and say, "This is what happened. You know, the guy tried to choke me from behind, and I put an elbow into his rib, broke 2 ribs, and then I turned around and did a key turn on him, and he resisted, and unfortunately it broke his neck, and now he's paralyzed." That's a real burden to face, because they usually don't realize the damage the techniques can do. And a lot of the damage is totally dependent upon how the attacker responds to whatever you've done. And I mean, I had one student who, he was walking through a park one night, and one of his friends decided to jump him from behind. And he threw him with a basic hip throw, but his friend ended up with permanent brain damage. And, you know, we have a responsibility for what we do, whether we be police, military, or citizens. But we also have to be able to live with what we do, or find a way to live with what we do. Because usually it's not our fault. And so, you know, it's just, you have to, you know, your students, it's hard to help your students develop a mindset, because what we do teach in ju-jitsu is designed, as Darren has said and all of us have said, is designed to injure. Ultimately, even a control hold. Even a submission. I mean, years ago, I had a black belt who was doing a sternum press submission with my knee. And I told him ahead of time, don't move. He decided to move to see what would happen. And it didn't crack his sternum. It cracked his breastplate. And he apologized afterwards. You know, paramedics took him to the hospital. In those days, they wrapped you with elastic bandage, and they told him to go home and try not to breathe for 4 weeks. Doctor had a good sense of humor, I guess, but you know, it actually is a relatively minor injury, but things do happen, and once you have done something like that to another person, you realize what power you actually have. And as Darren said, you control it as best you can. But whether or not you can control it is usually up to, someone want to give me the answer? Whether you're able to control a submission or a lock or hold is usually up, once it's set properly, is usually up to the
Person being held.
And that's where the injuries occur, because they decide, for some reason, even though you may be verbally telling them, stop resisting, calm down, all these other clear verbal commands, they may be on drugs. They may, you know, who knows what's going on between their ears. And they do what they do. And I'm not saying you can absolve yourself, but you have to find a way of living with some of this stuff if you've ever had to actually use it.
Back to the basic understanding, right, Sensei? You have to understand what the technique is designed to do so you can be efficient at it, proficient at it. And so what is a submission? And people take just that terminology for granted, right? Most people out there, even though they're in martial arts or some sort of defense system, right? They think a submission is a submission. A submission is somebody saying, that's the limit. I can't go anymore because the next thing is damage.
Right.
They stop before the damage is there, right? Okay, that's enough. It can't go any further. Both people need to understand what happens as a result of if you continue.
Right.
Well said. Well said.
Okay. Okay. We have one of the things I'm saying here, understanding how the body moves as we all move in the same manner. Okay. So, you know, if you find if you find an elbow or a bent leg, it's only going to either those, or you're looking at a person's head. All of these parts only move in certain directions, unless someone is really built weird, or they're really loosely jointed, or something like that. Everything moves in the same direction, and this is regardless of whatever martial art you've learned. So the next issue is, and we may get it a lot. You're teaching an ex-karate student a ju-jitsu technique, or an ex-aikido student, or kali student, and they say, "Oh, I learned that from my master in karate, or kali, or judo," and you say, "Yes, you did." So, are there commonalities in techniques across different martial arts? And if so, what are they?
That's a pretty good question. And, if from a logical or a historical standpoint, we as martial arts is shared across, and, I will say yes. I could go into a history lesson, but I think you all have been there before me. So you understand, I think, where I'm going with this. But I think in some similarities, we share almost like the similar things, and knowledge transfer shared across, over the centuries. You're going to see similarities and differences and modifications to certain things. So I do agree with you on this. You will see some similarities in different martial arts. For example, and I don't study it, but Hapkido and Taito-Ryu, Aki-Jitsu, right? We know that somehow the founder of Hapkido. Sorry, I have somebody screaming down the hall. Interesting. Anyways, don't recognize that person. Anyways, long story short, yeah, I believe there's going to be common within it.
Yeah, Jason, look, there's plenty of commonalities in all martial arts, right? And that's because
Correct.
It has been translated down. The body can only move certain ways, as Sensei said, unless you have some sort of a double jointed, loose joints, or whatever you want to refer to it as, right? And so, if you want to get into the history level, if anyone ever wants to get into the history level, I mean, where does it come from, right? Then you start to talk about lineage and origins and stuff like that. And what most people don't understand, that most martial arts today that everyone knows of is translated back to an origin of some sort of fashion or another of Japanese jiu-jitsu, and everybody incorporates it. So you see those commonalities in almost everything, or every system or style that you encounter. The best part that I like to say is there is the only limitation in martial arts is your own imagination. That's
absolutely
the only limitation.
Right. I think.
No, I agree with you 100%.
Yeah. Well, like Darren said, I think once you have your skills from any martial art, and you know how the human body moves, it's your ability to put those two together that will determine whether you're successful or not. One of the part of this is self-perceived limits in defending yourself. And this also has to do with the commonality in different martial arts. If for example, I use a wrist press to put a person into a arm lock, and then I get them bent over, and their back is facing, and they're being resistant, and I don't want to break their wrist, which is an option because that's a control option. I will always tell my students, or that number of students, is if you're going to strike with your elbow through their back to get them to go down, never strike the backbone, because that can cause all sorts of permanent damage. And that's a moral decision you have to make. I'll say, go for just inside the shoulder blade. Okay, why? Because there's a nerve or nerve pressure point in there, and it's going to hurt like hell, but it's not going to damage anything other than that point's going to be rather sore for a few days, and you can get the same effect without the wrist. But it's a matter of having that knowledge that allows you to do that. So one of the things I'm trying to say is sometimes our martial art, I have to do karate, gets in the way of us doing an effective self-defense technique that involves something other than, for example, hitting or kicking. Some martial arts teach nerve centers, pressure points, some don't. Some say you can only use them effectively with a strike. I've used I had a student who was high on drugs once who I had to walk about 200-300 yards before campus police got to him. And I had him in an arm lock with a wrist press. And there's a nerve, a pressure point up here. You know, for those of you who remember Star Trek, Spock's pressure point on the neck that would put people, that actually worked. Now, it won't put a person out, but if you get it, it creates a second control point. And I found, and this is the first time, that was the first time I had to use two things at once. But I learned if I went back and forth, what it did was it allowed me to control him.
So it's just the one where you squeeze the part of the shoulder?
Yeah, right.
Okay, because
yeah. It was just you don't maintain the pressure, but you apply pressure to the wrist, and as you slack off on the wrist, you apply pressure to the nerve center. And what it does, as I realized afterwards, was it kept his mind busy, because he could counter one physical pain from one part of his body, but the other physical pain, his brain had to choose between one or the other.
Got it.
And that
Got it.
The reason I was asking, because I think Christopher he knows that particular pressure point. He would try it on his brother and it would freeze him, but he would try it on me, and I have bigger shoulders. It didn't work on me. So it does depend on the person. Yes. I would say that it hurts and it makes me angry.
Maybe I was fortunate that he was on drugs. But yes, your anatomy does play a part. I've had some students, a couple of students in my career, that we refer to them as fire hydrants, because it's shoulder, head. There is no neck, and it's really hard to get to any nerve centers in there. But there are 3 or 4 of them from the ear, and you make a triangle going down your jawline and then towards the back of the neck, and you have this triangle where you may be able to find one nerve center in there. If one doesn't work, you try the other. But one of the reason I put that in there, self-perceived limits in defending yourself, is that some people believe they've learned one skill, karate or aikido or judo, and that's all they need to know. Or they have a handgun, or they carry a knife, and that's all they need to know. If you don't know how to use a knife, you're probably in trouble. Same with a handgun. And that's why I say sometimes we place limits on ourselves in terms of what we can do with what we think we know. So is that a legitimate reason for giving students additional insights in other martial arts skills we may not necessarily officially teach? I know Jason's going to say yes. Or is that part of our responsibility? No one's going to say anything.
Sensei, in a word, perspective.
A what?
I said, in a word, what you're describing is perspective.
Yeah.
You gain perspective with each additional self-defense technique you learn, and each additional martial art you endeavor to excel in. No different, no less, no more or less than if you play one instrument well and you want to take what you've learned on that and apply it to another instrument. There becomes a symbiosis between those two instruments.
Okay.
There's a symbiosis between a karate black belt and who learns ju-jitsu, traditional ju-jitsu, or vice versa, traditional ju-jitsu black belt who decides to take up karate. You develop a symbiotic relationship between those two forms of study, and one feeds the other. And the sum is far exceeds the parts.
Okay, so what you're saying is that, and I know this occurs as people, student, and it's regardless of martial art, as you move up in rank, you go into higher rank, particularly in the black belt levels in some martial arts, you tend to learn more techniques from other martial arts that will supplant what you've already learned in your core martial art.
I don't know if supplant is the right word.
I won't say supplant, they will reinforce or...
Yes, reinforce would be a better word. Yes. Yeah, and that's where the symbiosis comes in.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's perhaps why serious self-defense enthusiasts want to study more than one martial art. They want to study more than one discipline because they want that perspective. They recognize the value of that perspective.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the best bands I was ever in, we started a piece of music on our respective instruments, and 2 by 2 we swapped instruments. Time we got done with the song, everybody was playing a different instrument. And it was a really cool stage technique. We worked it out such that it's like, really? And only those paying attention noticed. Not everybody saw it, but it's cool. So you demonstrate not just virtuosity, but versatility. And versatility is at least as valuable as virtuosity, and virtually any endeavor I can think of.
Yeah. I would tend to agree with that.
Yeah. Darren mentioned earlier about imagination. Your only limitation is your imagination, and versatility and imagination go hand in hand. And virtuosity can be gained with just being relentless in your pursuit of knowledge, and whatever natural tendencies you've been blessed to be born with.
Okay, I think what we're going to do at this point, we could go into using your physical environment, but it's getting towards 9:30, and so I think what we'll do is save that for our next session, which will be on the 14th or 15th of February, whichever Saturday whatever date that is on that Saturday. And because our physical environment really determines what we can do in terms of technique and damage and what techniques we might want to use. And so we're going to leave that for next time. If we're getting to the point where right now we're down to 10 topics, or we're down to we have 8 topics left. If any of you have any ideas or suggestions for future topics, please get them to me.
I think I don't think we went over the using defensive tools or going over traditional weapons as a topic yet. So that maybe that should stay on the list.
What's the topic?
So I submitted one. So we went over defense against weapons, but we never went over using defensive weapons or using traditional weapons. So that was another topic. Yeah, like Kabuto.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think we went over that one. So that was I think that was I think we were going to go into that one, but we segued into another topic. So
Right. Okay, I noted that. We'll add it, put it back in there. Yeah, because then you get into some legal issues, and most of us don't walk around with traditional martial arts weapons on us.
I
So
just
a
think it's fun.
subtopic, Sensei, would be what is a weapon?
Pardon?
A subtopic, what is a weapon?
Very good.
Or a self-defense tool. And I guess that can it can help differentiate between your mindset.
Okay, got him. Okay, very good. So I want you guys to have a good weekend. We're done with the fires out here, we hope.
We have more rain coming in, so we're going to be okay.
We're going to be okay. We're going to get some rain, maybe an inch, but in Southern California, we welcome anything and everything.
Right.
So anyway, have a good weekend. Don't do anything too dangerous. Stay out of dark alleys and keep your headlights on. Anyway.
Have a good night. Have a good one.
You too.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.